a pleasure to be here, and I'll add a little bit more to my career just to bring myself into the room, get grounded, and let you know a little more about who I am and why I got into environmental things. I grew up in northern New Jersey, Manhattan area, pretty inner city type of thing, not much nature, and really found that when I did get out into nature, it just nurtured me, nourished me in ways that many of you probably experience yourself, but certainly it was a good escape. And for growing up in an inner city, at least I was using that to escape rather than drugs and alcohol and other things, which a lot of my colleagues and friends were. I went to Penn State for Pennsylvania State University, and I was there. I was actually the head of student government at a certain point, and I was there during 3 Mile Island, which was, as some of you may recall, I mean, that's now 30 years ago in 2009. It was 1979 that the power plant there had a radiation leak. And it was pretty scary for us as students. I mean, me being on the student government board representing my class, I got the opportunity to meet with the power plant operators and the legislators, all of whom really didn't know what to do and were equally afraid about what was happening, what had happened. We're trying to figure out how to resolve it. And all we knew was that they were telling us, okay, you're going to bring the women, the children, the older people, the sick people to the university grounds, and they would be staying at in our gymnasiums, dormitories, cafeterias, and around the campus. And so it was just a lot of fear. I mean, that was my real introduction to heavy-duty environmental things. And I figured, while I sat in those rooms with the power plant operators, I thought, they look equally afraid, and I need to put myself in their shoes and understand. And I was pre-law at the time, and I found myself sympathizing or empathetic with their stance, as well as the legislators who were like, look, I just got voted. I certainly didn't think something like this would happen. And so we're all just trying to negotiate what the solutions would be. And I took it upon myself to really study nuclear energy at the time and understand, why were we using it? What were the issues related to waste? What were the issues related to leaks? How come it was being, proliferated so well in places like France and around the world? And what were some of the real issues and whether we should be doing it. So I did that. I became part of the whole anti-nukes effort. It was, during that time, the late 70s and early 80s, they had a lot of protests in D.C. and concerts and all kinds of things. And it was, so that was my foray into environmental things. I decided to shift from being a lawyer to a mediator, an environmental mediator, and I studied that for a number of years. I actually went to Amsterdam. I studied that for a couple of years there. Came back, studied it at Harvard. They did the Harvard Negotiation Project. UC Berkeley had a good program. Boulder Center for Dispute Resolution had a wonderful program. So I just really immersed myself in arbitration, mediation, environmental dispute resolution, conflict management. And that's how I started my career. I began on the Boston Harbor Cleanup Project, where we were siting a large primary, secondary, tertiary treatment facilities, large tunnel that would go way out into the ocean, and then many facilities for the waste. This, at the time, which was once called sludge, and then we watched it go all the way to biosolids and residuals and all nicer ways to say, sewage. And so we were basically trying to figure out where do we site that, and a lot of conflict. You can imagine the communities were not interested in having incinerators and landfills in their backyards, and those are the types of things that we typically cite in minority communities, impoverished communities, communities that don't have as much of a voice. So I really started to get interested in the area of environmental justice, and that really has permeated my career. One of the things I learned during that time was that I should make myself dispensable. Initially, when the gentleman worked hard to bring me into the Boston Harbor Cleanup Project, he said, I want you to, initially, right off the bat, I want you to make yourself dispensable. And I thought, well, I thought I was special, and that's why you brought me here, and you really wanted me. And I soon learned what that meant, and it really was to create the systems, the processes, the tools, put them in place so that I could walk away and things would still work, so that the whole system would work together. And that's been another very important philosophy for me throughout my career. I left the Boston Harbor cleanup. I moved out here to California, and this was right before the Loma Prieta earthquake. And I started a company with another woman who actually is the director of environmental planning for Stanford today. Her name is Kay Wilson. We started a company called Public Affairs Management. And we mostly worked in the with the public sector. I shouldn't say in the public, large infrastructure projects. She had a very strong background in transportation and responsible land use development. I had a strong background in water and wastewater. We brought those together, and we were looking at opportunities for public-private partnerships. We were mostly working with communities where either the government or a foundation or somebody else would fund the relationship, the mediation endeavor that we were taking on to either cite something, to clean up something. So from that point on, I would have to say I worked on almost every major project you could imagine in California. I helped negotiate the Bay Delta Agreement. Many years ago, worked on all of California's water issues, from the Central Valley Water Improvement Project, and did a lot with agriculture, municipal and industrial, and environmental conflicts of how do we give water back to the fish, how do we, all of those issues. Also worked on the deregulation of utilities. So the fossil fuel plants to begin with, and then the hydro plants. When I was doing that, did a lot of ocean stuff as well, because we were, you have power plants that are often dumping their water out into the marine environments, and that's a big issue. Worked on all the base closures, lots of Caltrans projects. One of the biggest projects I actually worked on was the Cypress, which was the structure that collapsed during the Loma Prieta earthquake, and I worked on that for the whole 10 years. And that was a real lesson in environmental justice as well, because this was a community that had been disrupted pretty heavily in the 50s by the siting of the freeway. And a lot of their parents actually stood out in the middle of the freeway in front of the bulldozers and said, "You can't put this here, it's going to destroy our community." It was, at that time, a really vibrant, very ethnically diverse community, lots of old houses, Victorian houses, and it was the Polish community and the Irish and Hispanic and Jewish, and lots of different ethnic backgrounds. And then, sure enough, when they put that freeway in, and then they were bringing 18-wheelers down the little neighborhood streets, they did in fact destroy the community. And as many of you know, West Oakland today is pretty bad shape, and it's just starting now with the removal of the cypress to get generating some income from some businesses connected to the port. But it's still struggling community, a lot of crack houses and a lot of poverty. And so it really, for me, was a continuation of the whole emphasis on environmental justice. I ran the job training center there and the environmental communications and community relations. About 12 years ago, I met a senior vice president at Hewlett-Packard who asked me to come in to use some of my skills. Initially, I said, "No, I don't do computers." I said, "I really do people and environment." And he said, "Oh, come on." I mean, I wasn't even, it was so funny. I'd spent 17 hours with him flying from Rio de Janeiro. And I was like, "Have a nice life." And he's like, "Well, give me your card or something." I said, "I really don't do computers." And largely because at the time, what was funny about it was that the environmentalists, some of the environmental groups were beginning to embrace computers and were using them to send out a lot of their campaign letters and their protest letters to companies or to legislators, and also as a result, because they have limited resources and many of them are volunteers. They didn't have time to come to a lot of these meetings, so they would just send these materials out or say, "Well, I'll just look on the computer." So that's hard when you're trying to do mediation and conflict resolution. You actually need the people there, and you need the physical presence of them, and it's a pretty long and engaged process. So I meant it when I said it to him. I said, they're getting in my way right now in terms of my job. But I decided to respond to him. He was persistent and asked me if I would bring some of the skill sets into HP that I learned, from strategic planning to mediation to facilitation to bringing them more enlightenment around environmental issues. They had really just known about it from the consumer right to know and some of the regs, and and then the Nike thing had happened more recently. That happened in 1996, where the sweatshop labor issues were attacked. And so the vice president that I worked for was smart enough to recognize that they were beginning to outsource, mostly Mexico, China, Indonesia, all parts of Southeast Asia like Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, then Eastern Europe, Central and Eastern Europe, India, Brazil, and Mexico. So those are really largely the areas where most computers, servers, PCs, the handhelds are all manufactured today. And as they began outsourcing, he could see that they were just, doling out these contracts for cost reasons and certainly quality, but weren't looking at some of these critical issues. What was happening on the ground? How was the environment being polluted? How were the workers being treated? What was the health and safety in the factories? Tremendous amounts of corruption and bribery, so that even if you said, okay, these people are only supposed to work 60 hours a week, you'd see the local government provide a waiver that says, no problem, let them work 84 hours a week. And so what you were trying to do somewhat by using the laws was being undercut or undermined by the corruption and bribery as well. And so, all part of unfortunately, the way the world works, and particularly in globalizing societies. So I designed the whole supply chain social and environmental responsibility program for the company. Like I said, began that about 12, 13 years ago. And that today is really a world-class program at HP. A couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, I took the position of Director of Environmental Sustainability. And as part of that, I was the sort of number one person in the company looking at the whole structure. HP is challenging in that you have the servers and services, the PCs and the printers, and they're all very siloed. And their messaging is quite siloed around environmental things as well. And so my job was really to step back and look at what did we have in common, and what kind of strategy should we have moving forward, and really much more far-reaching than the next 1, 2, 3 years. Like, where should we be in 10 years? What kind of company should we be? What should we look at? And when I say this, these are things like, and I'll talk a little bit about some of these things in the SSV talk, but the things like virtualization, that really enables people to not have to come to work physically anymore, and the whole teleconferencing space. It enables digital, print to digital, where people aren't printing as much anymore, but how do we really enhance and enable the digital environment? It's the whole smart grid concept of using servers, recognizing that the server is like the brain of the data center. The data center is the brain of, that's the smart grid. And so how to really have the right role there and enable change. IT actually represents only about 2% of the total greenhouse gas emissions impact on the planet. However, that'll go up in the next few years as we build, as we have to put more infrastructure on the ground to support some of these services. But the more we can virtualize it, the more we put it in the cloud, the less impact we'll have. And what you will see happening is there will naturally be some infrastructure in places. So that'll go on the increase. You'll probably go up to 3 or 4% impact, but at the same time, as you're virtualizing and enabling all of these other sectors, you'll be coming down. So it'll always stay at about 2 or 3% is the prediction on its impact. But the more exciting thing is IT has this phenomenal opportunity to take things like publishing and completely change and transform the whole business model, to help reuse happen in a completely different way, to what we see in the whole job space, for example, is that you've got, if you took $1 billion and you put it towards a coal plant, you create about 800 jobs. You took that same billion and you put it towards a nuclear plant, you create about 1,300 jobs. Take that same billion, put it towards solar, you're at about 1,800. Wind is about 3,000. But green buildings, totally retrofitting infrastructure and changing to smart buildings and green buildings will create about 8,000 jobs. So, we're talking about orders of 10 times orders of magnitude. And so when we do hear some of the rhetoric around AB 32 and 23, and it's not really, the jobs are for sure in the green space. I mean, we know that in clean tech alone has brought 500,000 jobs into the state, brought $65 billion into the state, and a lot of that will stop if we don't see things like AB 32 moving forward. So let me get into SSV. I'm very excited to play the role as the chair of this organization. I've known about this organization for many years, and I think there are tremendous opportunities on how we can move forward. So what happened to our picture?
Shall we turn off the light?
Oh, is that it? Does it have to? We don't have to turn them all off. I don't like too dark. That's great. Okay, so we've got dark. And so we're going to talk a little bit about some of the issues in sustainability, what the landscape is in Silicon Valley for sustainability. One of the things, Mariana knows this, one of the things I did at HP was I spearheaded an organization called the Electronic Industry Citizenship Coalition, and it was bringing all the competitors together. So there was a point in time where I was looking at all the tools I was using for suppliers around the world, and I'm starting to realize that my competitors, as they got on board, would start bringing different tools, different forms, different surveys, different audits, different questionnaires, different corrective action plans, different trainings, and that this would really be inefficient, and it would more importantly overwhelm these growing emerging societies and our supply chain. And so I had this, drive to just bring us together and say, look, let's share everything. Let's be efficient. I feel the same about what's happening in Silicon Valley. I mean, there are probably 5-10 organizations at least that are overlapping in some way and all doing something around climate. So how do we pull our resources together, and I like to call it radical collaboration of nonprofits. We need to do something different around this space. So keep that in mind, and we'll talk some about the landscape. I'll talk more specifically about the goals that we have for Sustainable Silicon Valley. There's a really exciting project that we call EcoCloud that I probably won't get into a lot of detail just for time's sake today. Mariana has a lot more information on that, and I'd encourage you all to get real familiar. I'll give you some highlights and certainly if there are questions about it. But it's a very exciting new project, and then some recommendations. So I'll start with the good news. I am a believer that we have to be. I mean, I've seen some pretty amazing things out in the world, and I mean things that would create real trauma in people's systems. But the reason I've been able to do that is for two things. I stay generally pretty optimistic. I have a lot of hope. I see how the world is changing and people are starting to embrace these things and consciousness is raising. And I'm also pretty clinical about the facts and the bad news and willing to take that head on and be transparent about it and say, here's what we need to do. So I'm going to give you the good news and the bad news. Obviously, change and transformation are occurring on a daily basis, and we're really seeing it. And we're seeing the pace pick up fast, which is exciting, which is what needs to happen. We'll talk about climate change. The internet is democratizing and empowering consumers and business customers. I mean, now what used to take weeks, months, years, to get out and to get support or get endorsement can take days, can take a day. And companies, we know that as companies because we suddenly are, a campaign goes out and within 2 days we've got newspapers calling us and everybody calling us. So we have to really respond and be tracking and watching what's happening on the internet. Cloud computing is allowing virtualization where, again, people are able to start businesses, really powerful businesses, right out of their home, where We can communicate in a much more naturally in a virtual environment. There are increasing incentives and rules out there for reducing our waste. I was mentioning to Joe, having been in the environmental field for 30 years, it's always been obvious to me that that if you reduce your waste, or you change your designs, that you're going to save money. I mean, I know that from personally. I put solar panels on my house. Yes, it's a capital investment, but at a certain point, I don't have any more electricity bills. And so it's really making that investment. We're seeing a lot more incentive programs. There are programs like EP, LEAD, Clean Water Act, AB 32, all have incentives and opportunities built within them. Of course, many businesses would say, but they're regulations, and we don't want increased legislation and increased regulation. You have to have the carrot and the stick. And particularly to level the playing field and to be able to punish the folks who aren't staying at the baseline even. And then green supply chains becoming much more popular. I think that people are also paying attention to raw materials. Also, when you're buying clothes, what farm is that? What farm is the cotton being picked at? You're buying electronics or jewelry. Which mine is that coming from? What's happening at that mine? What are the human rights conditions? So this is an area of increasing, I would say, information demand around it from NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and groups around the world. Especially also government and large companies, their environmentally preferred purchasing or procurement programs are really starting to ask a lot more detailed questions about this. And then designing for green. We all know that ultimately it's in the initial design where if we can make a difference, that's what will make the real change. We've heard of things like Cradle to Cradle, Bill McDonough's, Janine Benris does biomimicry, fascinating area if you don't know much about it. It's just mimicking nature's systems. Green chemistry, you've got institutes now coming out, green products, and so I think we're going to move more and more into the design space, and we're going to focus on that in SSB. The bad news. The rate of climate change is worse, and it's faster than it's anticipated by the IPCC from their 2007 report. We're obviously seeing much more severe weather, fire, floods, storms. The challenges to adaptation, species are moving at different rates. You have some species that the rate of extinction is just phenomenal right now. We're losing many, many species per day on the planet. And similarly, though, if you've got changes in climate happening and some of these temperate weather patterns changing, you've got things like trees that, the weather's changing, and they grew well under these conditions. Now they can't just pick up and move. So what happens? So that's why we're seeing lots more funguses and beetles and diseases and things. So also billions of people are living near the sea level. I'm working on a project called the California Green Plan, and it's mimicked after a program in the Netherlands called the National Environmental Plan, and that which started about 18, 20 years ago. And the concept is we need to look at things more systemically. But the Netherlands was the queen about 18, 20 years ago who said, we're not going to our grandchildren are absolutely not going to live here because we're under sea level. We're one of the first countries to go, and we need to start taking action and showing what we can do around this. And so we've got whole islands that are already starting to disappear, population. So what we're looking at is just billions of refugees around the world, and we all know how we've traditionally treated refugees. And then the food chain that will also be changed by the acidification and the warming of the ocean. So these things are for real. We're told that in 2050, if we are not climate neutral, but just moving towards, there is no discussion anymore. We're already there. And so I'm not a doomsdayer. It was funny, we had an eco salon a few months ago with the gentleman who started Ask Jeeves came in and spoke, and he's got this little presentation called A Really Inconvenient Truth, and it's the real facts behind the inconvenient truth. And it's fairly devastating, and you can walk away from that and just go to bed for a year because it's like, how do we get ourselves out of this? But so I think there are actions to take, and what's exciting is we're seeing a bigger groundswell, and I believe a lot of the action is going to happen organically and from our youth and from people who are truly being impacted by this. Some of the open questions are: can we evolve our infrastructure and our business models fast enough to reduce the harm, to adapt to climate change, to allow the restoration of biodiversity and ecosystems, and more importantly, to prevent the societal collapses that are going to happen during this transition? If any of you have ever heard of the natural step, it's an interesting philosophy that really takes a look at it looks at the fact that the Earth at one point in time was just this gaseous ball of flames, revolving very quickly, and then it slowed down, and then you saw deserts, and then you saw eventual planting, and until you ended up with lush jungles. And now, when you look at the pictures, you can actually see that we're just simply reversing the pattern. You're seeing much more deserts, much more warming that's occurring, and it's because we're either extracting, boring into it at an unprecedented rate, throwing things out into the atmosphere, increasing the level of non-biodegradable materials, landfills all over the planet, and we're preventing the only naturally occurring regenerative process that happens on the planet, which is photosynthesis, from occurring as we take down the trees and we take out the oxygen. So the concept is basically we're putting the planet through this big experiment, and there's no knowing exactly what time it's going to just go, okay, back to a big ball of gaseous flames. And quite honestly, the Earth isn't going to be real emotional about that. It's cyclical, it's changing, but we won't live here. And so what's going to happen between now and then is what's interesting. We all know that things like 9/11 and some of the things that happen on the planet may happen because of the haves and the have-nots. This has always been the issue, and when we're in the have-nots, people are in real survival mode and fight or flight, and violence erupts, and so we're really looking at some interesting times as these weather changes really take hold as it relates to society. What's some of the source of our solutions? Business, cross-sector solutions, new thinking, new stories. Marianne and I were talking about, she had the word metaphors there, and I changed it to stories because I was reading this chapter last week to a book that I like in it, and it was talking about how the art of magic, and how in some ways we've always been understood magic. And what it started with is it said, if you think about it, when we were little kids, one of the first things we learned was words. And what did we learn to do with words as soon as we got to kindergarten, first grade? We learned to spell. So that was the first spell on words. And then when we put a bunch of words together into a sentence, and the concept there was that what was the sentencing that was happening? And we were being sentenced to certain perceptions based on this construction of spells and words. And then from the sentences, you've got stories. And the stories, and then it went in to talk about the stories, and it says, and what do the stories make up? The stories make up history. Just his story, and so we've been living, in a lot of these stories, and this is the way things are supposed to be. This is the paradigm. This is how you should operate. This is how you should produce. This is what you need. This is the American dream. This is, if you look at things like the Pachamama tribe, they're saying, look, you need to change your dream. That's what we're really asking for here. So story, and what I also liked was that they talked a little bit about the opposite, his story, which, largely a lot of the religious doctrines and things like that have some bunch of people sat down and started writing it down. It's their story of what happened, their perception. And my story is mystery. The connection there is mystery. And so that's still evolving, and we get the chance to do that. So what are some of those new thinking? And transforming existing institutions, changing the conversation that expects that we're going to have exponential growth in a finite system. Addressing the overproduction and overconsumption. And this is really the crux of it. If you haven't had the opportunity to see the story of stuff, get online and look at that. It talks a lot about the whole overproduction, overconsumption cycle. And then finally, the resilience of natural systems. I mean, this is what's most exciting. I mean, for many years, spent a lot of time up on the Kennebec River. And when I first started going there, I mean, it was, you couldn't go near. It was red tannic from, the tanneries, logging that had taken place on there. You certainly would never swim in it. And when they stopped all that activity, it was less than 10 years that it was absolutely beautiful and completely swimmable. So Mother Nature really does have a way of bringing things back to life if we just let it alone. Some of the needs, we need solutions for scale and scope of the challenge. We need to highlight what's working. We need better collaboration amongst business, government, and nonprofits. It's not going to be just one of those entities. Business is out generally for profit, and government needs to continue to be the checks and balances on that. But more importantly, government can be the incentivizer and provide the environment for R&D so that business can take it to scale. The civil society and nonprofits playing a really critical role in reminding us of our values. Business investments going, so that's pretty much what they say. So moving beyond education to action, assessment, innovation. You can see on this graph just how sustainability has evolved. I mean, even the word sustainability, a lot of people have struggled with and said, oh, what does it really mean? And I mean, it's pretty clear in the dictionary, and when you look at it and you've listened to it, it's just, can future generations thrive on this planet? Are we making it so? And so, in the in the early part of this, it was all about 60s, 70s, reducing toxics, reporting, doing reporting on our greenhouse gas emissions, looking at green building practices, green processes. Now we're looking at things like dematerialization, biomimicry, design for sustainability, how we put whole infrastructures in that are much more planning oriented, and so that we can live in a different economy. It's just the word economy means to take care of one's house. It's not about finances only. It's actually to take care of one's property, one's house. So how do we improve that? As you can see along the axes, the types of things that have happened in, or how you go from just having things like a green team in a company, all the way to the whole industry being sustainable, and go from compliance all the way to thinking about it right from the outset. So this is a shift. We wanted to talk a little bit about what's happening out in Silicon Valley, and I'm not really going to put too much emphasis into what all these groups are doing, but they all exist, and several of them are focusing specifically on climate change, with different aspects of it. Some just to look at the policy, and others, to bring a system into life, for a whole sector. But I think what's also important is that all of us are having events, and in some cases those are confusing, and it's also confusing to some of the companies, that go, well, which one should I join, and why should I join that versus this, or which event do I go to, and so in a time when companies, especially in Silicon Valley, are really looking at consolidating and saying, look, I can only go to 2 or 3, prioritize. So the more we can really force that kind of radical collaboration, the better off we're going to be. And I think it's critical. And a group like this, can I think facilitate that dialogue. So it's something to think about, and certainly something that we would recommend. So here is specifically how we think philanthropy can help. Sponsor dialogues among the leaders about the systemic problems and solutions, and bring those down to earth. I like that concept of bringing sustainability down to earth. It's not this, let's, create a better world, a better planet, and all that, and then people are looking at it and go, well, that's just too overwhelming. I can't wrap my arms around that. What does it mean? Just really helping to understand how things are so interdependent on one another. You can't just solve one issue by solving just that they're bigger problems. Support organizations facilitating transformation of resource management. Especially put your focus on companies that are really focused on this. Build community among both citizens and institutions to increase societal resilience. And I mean, that's really the citizens in some of the institutions like the universities or the hospitals. I mean, they don't have the kind of resources. And yet they're going to be so critical as we make these transformations. They're the entities that really reach churches, that reach into society and can make more contact with their values. At the end of the day, you know, I mean, that's the real community. And that's what people are, you know, it's an interesting time that we're living in. I think we're having a lot of conversations about the value of values, you know, and how, you know, what was really important to us at one time, and still to many of us, it was family and connectivity and relationships. And, you know, we've shifted into this accomplish, do, you know, ambition, drive, society, and we've lost connection to a lot of that. And that's part of why we see, you know, the diseases, the addictions, all these things that surface in our society have a lot to do with, I got to self-medicate because I just can't take all this. I can't take it in, you know. And so supporting those institutions is really important. Supporting collaborative efforts for transformation by corporations and their industries. I mean, it's so powerful what a group of corporations or an entire industry sector can do. I mean, I could really see that when I was sitting in the room with, you know, $13 trillion worth of money from every major electronic company in the world. It was like, we got attention, you know, from every government. From that, you know, I spoke at the UN several times. I was the negotiator at the ILO, the International Labor Organization in Geneva, spoke at the OECD. I mean, many entities that were like, I mean, this is a powerful voice. And so by helping them come together is a really important thing. And then really supporting the research, the best practices, and the storytelling for new economic models, because that's something that we had always expected and continue to expect government to do. You know, do the R&D, do the incentivizing so that corporations can bring things to scale. Well, we're seeing more and more that government can't even pay for its basic infrastructure. And so how do we, you know, that's how I think philanthropists and people with resources and organizations with resources can help. So let me just shift and then I'll close. I'm talking a little bit about SSV. Our vision is that a thriving Silicon Valley with a healthy environment, a vibrant economy, and a socially equitable community. Our mission is to lead the Silicon Valley community to a more sustainable future by engaging, collaborating with local government, businesses, and community to identify and address the highest priority environmental issues. And I would say that that's one of our key differentiators. There aren't many other groups amongst the ones that I was sharing that are giving somewhat equal weight to the non-governmental organizations, the non-governmental government, and private sector. So that's important, and we're here as a convener for that purpose. Some of our accomplishments: we were founded in 2001, incorporated in 2004. We now have 130 partners, some of the largest companies here in the Valley. We started the regional greenhouse gas emissions water registry. So, you know, quite some time back, what was really important was for companies to be monitoring and tracking, to bring transparency to light, and so we put together a monitoring system that's really evolved even since when we first started it, which was just spreadsheets and a report, to now we work with some of the more sophisticated carbon data and resource management data software companies that can help our partners. And we're actually even looking at transitioning our role in that in our future vision, because we're not interested in being the entity that holds companies' feet to the fire. We're interested in being more of an innovation hub, and how do we facilitate transformation. Partners have reduced their CO2 by nearly 1 million tons, and will continue to report on that kind of thing to show the Valley is carrying its weight. Many partners have established green teams and eco boards, and we've really also seen an evolution of the green teams, you know, where some of the people who were the people who walked around and picked up the styrofoam cups or the garbage, and now they're the head of sustainability for that company. So supporting them and giving them the best practices is another role that we have assumed. And then we're partners to make progress in things like water, waste, transportation, and energy. Some areas of focus specifically in the water and energy. We have the program called EcoCloud. I'll spend another moment on that. Smart microgrid. We've been working for the past couple of years with Santa Clara University. That is that has a vision to get themselves completely self-generating, off the grid, water and energy and across the board. And they also are excited about that because they see the opportunity then to show other institutions and other universities how to do the same and be the poster child or really the for that. So we're currently cited there, and we've been helping to facilitate a lot of that dialogue and get them the visibility and the funds and the prioritization that they've recently gotten. Working on urban water cycle and boosting reclaimed water. In the material resources, we're looking to focus really on the environmentally preferred purchasing because we do work with governments, and we recognize government can be a real catalyst for companies to change how they do business and their whole supply chain. Cradle to cradle design, that's another area, is looking at the design space, so that's another focus of ours. And then finally, the other major area is the human and capital, where we're pulling together communities of practice. Like our next eco salon will be with financial and legal people around the valley, and we'll bring them together to talk about what can we do in the financial markets and when you're lending, and what can you do in the legal institutions when you're representing different companies or entities with environmental issues. And the curriculum for sustainability leaders and events. And then, of course, we have our website and the EcoCloud. Yeah, so this is really the EcoCloud project, and really the purpose of it is to bring together all the relevant stakeholders in industry, government, NGOs, and academia to make the current urban water system more sustainable. And these are some of the things that we're using to apply it with: cradle-to-cradle principles, advanced technology, best practices. How do you make sure that you have accurate scientific knowledge? You all agree on the sources of knowledge and where the repository is. Whole systems integration, life cycle cost effectiveness. And what's exciting about this, and I won't go into detail, is that once we're done with, the urban water system, you can do this with any other resource, because it's going to create sort of a whole ecosystem of how you get information and how it gets back out, and it's connected to the whole virtual life cycle. And so would you add anything to that, Mariana?
Yeah, I think there's two levels that EcoCloud has kind of two parts right now. One is person-to-person relationships, helping companies in the valley use reclaimed water in their cooling towers, which is about 40% of their water use right now, instead of using potable water use, reclaimed industrial water. And so we're having events to kind of show people how to do that, and sharing best practices around that. And then we're creating also a website with help from companies like SAP and IBM, where a lot of this information will be cited, but we're also creating kind of a social networking dimension where people can share information. So, for example, Eric Hawkins at Air Products has done a good job. He didn't want to have 50 million phone calls. He can have his case up there, and people can go to the EcoCloud to look for it. And then there'll be other zones in the EcoCloud beyond water, but with this part of the water, there's also professors at San Jose State and Stanford who are working on mapping the urban water cycle and looking at where can you make investments in the cycle to do reuse of water and recapture of water based on where the energy and the costs are in the system, and be able to have that whole cycle show up there too, so decision makers can do scenario planning and understand really where's the water coming from and going.
And we thought, a lot of the groups are focused on energy, and we obviously can't not focus on energy. I mean, that's a critical thing, but no, not a lot of groups have really put in the kind of emphasis that we need on water, which is, as many of us know, I mean, it's the next oil for sure. It will be the reason that there are tremendous challenges and wars and all over the planet is water is the next. And so us doing our part and finding, and this is the home of innovation, and where so many seeds are planted. And so making sure that we can communicate that out to the world and be a resource for best practices and right contacts and ways to easily access that information is what we're really aiming for here. And I'm also on the board of the Blue Planet Network, which really is looking at, how, more than 4 billion people don't have access to clean water and what that means. And similarly is supporting projects all over the planet, philanthropists that are supporting projects in Africa and India and all over, just a simple rain catchment program that will help people do things differently. So that's part of the real challenge is how do we help, people around the world, and I've traveled to so many times, I've been over 80 countries right now, and they often say, and most of it's been for work purposes, we want to be like you. We want to have the luxuries that you have, and we want to have a house and a car, and we all know that well, there's a part of me that says you deserve that, and you deserve to have as good a life as we've had. They can't, and if they do, we're done. So the real question is how can we help them not make the same mistakes we've made? How can we show them what we've learned from some of the real ecosystem disasters? I mean, just California alone and its whole water system is a phenomenal education for, we were trying to bring that over to China when they were building Three Gorges Dam to say, you're about to make the same mistakes that we've made only 30, 50 years ago, and here's all the results, and we'd really like you to learn from this. It's hard when the politics, the political will, and the money is all going towards short-term gratification. So, so the goals, I'm actually not going to get into the details of EcoCloud. There's several more slides, and we'll send this out to you. And here's my contact information, and I'm more than happy to answer more detailed questions on everything from, my career to what HP is doing to what's happening, in green plants, and most importantly to SSV. So maybe we can take a little time for questions and discussion now.
Thank you.
That was fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. I was struck by one slide in particular where you talked about the role of philanthropy and the possibilities. Probably the most, a real relevant slide for us.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Can you talk about that a little more?
Yeah, because here we're starting a grant round.
Yeah.
A pretty significant grant round for us.
Yeah.
And, we've kind of narrowed it down to some areas of impact, which we'll all be discussing a little later today. But any advice we could get on how to move forward or ideas would be appreciated.
Yeah, as I mentioned, I do think that this concept of, Mariana and I have started a process of going and meeting with, I think we've set up a couple of meetings with Silicon Valley Leadership Group. We're going to meet with Russ Hancock's group. This effort of how do we work together, and what does that look like? What is that, radical collaboration of all of these different sustainability groups look like? And how can we support that? And what structure would that take? And we're interested in playing a role in that because we're looking and we're going, okay, folks are some are just chasing the dollar someplace and going, there's clean tech, there's a profit opportunity, there's that, and that's fine. Or going after corporations because they seemingly have the dollars. My experience in the past few years is I watched HP's philanthropy budget go from 65 million down to 18, and the income, the same time frame I was there, and I've been there, the income went from 80 billion to 130 billion. So it's a very interesting dynamic. You've got lower margins, lower profit, and leaders in the community that believe that the money should go into different pockets, and I think that the more we can set examples on how to invest money wisely, and I truly believe in the business case for sustainability, and I think that's another area that wouldn't make it independent, but I would say, we've been weak in demonstrating the real metrics and the results of why it makes business sense, why it makes financial sense to go towards sustainability across the board. So supporting efforts in that space, supporting efforts that would bring us together to say, look, let's not be redundant, and let's make sure that the appropriate role remains for government and civil society. We're all focused on business because we think that's where we can get the dollars from membership or events attendance or things like that. Then we're missing the other crucial aspects of society. Academia, non-government organizations, and the government. So I think there's a lot more opportunity in public-private partnerships, a lot more opportunity around reallocating government dollars, and until we can get that together, so I would just say that's a big area. I think, so sponsoring those kinds of dialogues among the leaders. I think the first one, the Green Plan one, is very specifically around that, looking at things systemically, looking at how you can't just address water without recognizing its impact on energy, and you can't address energy without recognizing its impact on transportation, and you can't, and that they are integrated, and if we don't have, I'm sorry to be a little bit confusing and rambling on this, but one of the things that I don't think is everybody thinks that we'll just take it as policy or legislation, and while I'm a fan of appropriate policy and legislation, like I'm a real supporter of AB 32, I also think that by the time it often gets to execution, and by the time it starts rolling out, it gets so watered down, and everybody figures out, their piece of it, and that you could have been running so much faster by just getting the business community engaged, getting civil society supporting something, getting government to back it in some different way. I think that I had that experience lots of times in the company where I would say, well, we want to do this whole thing in India, we want to change our whole model a bit, well, let's just go do it. And everybody look and go, well, no, you got to get that backing from the CEO, and you have to do this. And I'm like, why do we have to do that? I mean, I'd rather just let's go do it, test it, and see if it works. And if it does, the CEO will gladly stand in front of the parade we started, And so I think that, just advancing these things without feeling like policy and legislation and who the next governor is going to determine all these things. I mean, yes, it'll have influence, but we see that it operates much more slowly. In the Netherlands, they were able to pass 237 policy changes to support that NEP. Could you ever see that happen in here? I mean, we can get one thing through. It's amazing, and there's just no political will. There's no, So I think that we have to, as philanthropists, as the business community, just sort of say, this is where we're going to put our money. This is where we're going to put our, on integrated planning and on things like this.
The time when pollinators arrive at a location shifts from the time that the thing that needs to be pollinated is blossoming.
Yeah.
So what you're winding up with is that that's going to accelerate the kind of species loss, and create from a rich ecological type 3 ecological environment to more growth.